And Marathon has finally come out. Everybody is deeply concerned that it's going to be another Concord, or very excited that it's going to be another Concord. And it has landed, and it's not Concord.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even High Guard, which
It's also not High
had
Guard.
a bunch of, CCU concurrent player issues upon release. So that's good. That's a bit of a sigh of relief. As I had mentioned earlier, Marathon came out on March 5th, and it did hit a peak of 88,000 players. And, as being reported by Alenia, the DAU, or the daily active users for the game, are also fairly healthy. We're talking about people, 280,000 players playing the game throughout the day, specifically on the weekend. And then during weekdays, the metric is a little bit closer to 250,000 daily active users. So people are enjoying the game. They're coming back to it. It's got an 88% very positive on Steam last time I checked. When I looked at Metacritic, it was an 8.1, which is, again, pretty good. The main problem here is that Alenia Insights, which is getting referenced for a lot of the data here, is saying the game's only really generated, likely, $55 million in gross revenue. However, we don't know how much the game took to develop. That's one of the problems. And then the other problem is Sony bought Bungie for $3.7 billion because they thought they were going to be making oodles of money in 2022 from whatever new IP, which ended up being Marathon, or not new IP, but new game from Bungie, which ended up being Marathon, and Destiny 2, which has generally not been the case. I believe, for example, right now, Destiny 2 is actually struggling to maintain 10,000 concurrent players on Steam, at least, which is, oh, how the mighty fall.
Yeah. The Sony absolutely got their, as with everything to do with their live service, and we'll talk. The challenge here is going to be actually spending the first portion of this conversation more on the numbers that lay the basis for the speculation that we're going to be doing in the latter half of the episode, without just getting directly into that. But suffice it to say, much like with almost everything to do with Sony's live service sort of push, they either got their hand on the ball extremely late, or just, misread what was working or not working within any given, system here. So they 100% picked up Destiny 2 through Bungie on the decline. It's not to say that Destiny 2 didn't have a couple of good years under Sony, but they did not pick it up while it was peaking. They picked it up after it had peaked. Or right around the time of the peak, which meant that the decline was still yet to come. And when it came swiftly and completely. So, I mean, Destiny 2 is not in great shape. And Marathon is currently certainly drawing higher numbers than Destiny 2 at the moment, both, I believe, in concurrent and daily user. But it's also reviewing considerably better, both in terms of like the sort of sliding scale that Steam does, and I think in terms of like Metacritic bits, but I actually, now that I say that, I realize I haven't sourced that, so perhaps disregard that last bit. But Marathon is, by all accounts, performing reasonably, I mean, extremely well for a small to mid-sized game.
Well, especially if you compare it to how it was received in 2025. I mean, I think largely it's indisputable that this game is better off for having been put in the oven again for another year.
Oh God, yeah.
The reception from people is night and day. I do think that a lot of the criticism that happened to the game last year has lingered kind of in the zeitgeist for certain people in the games industry, certain people that are, interested in those kind of games. And so I do think it hurt them to have such an initial negative reception. But at the same time, like, the real problem here, just to dig into it, is apparently the game is very hardcore PvP focused. We're not talking about a game that, Aaron and I are probably going to play.
This is this is where we get to one of my my like personal touchstone moments for this conversation, because on a conceptual level, and yes, to get into the marathon specific bits about, for some reason, like not for some reason, but why it might not be connecting with the broadest possible audience. Because you've got your three different sort of touch points for success or failure, right? On one end, you've got your Concord. 2 degrees above that, you've got High Guard. Somewhere in the middle, you've got Marathon, and then all the way off to this side, you've got Arc Raiders, right? Which just like exploded, massive hit, great. Helldivers 2, great, exploded, massive hit, gigantic numbers, printing money forever, whatever. Marathon somewhere in the middle there in terms of success. But the fascinating thing to me, and the thing that drives me actually a little bit crazy, it's like that itch you just can't quite scratch, you can't quite get there. Marathon seems to be the most authentically artistic of any of these games, both in terms of its visual style, which I have heard described in equal measure as like caustic and chaotic and completely illegible, and also inspired and intriguing and unique and genuinely actually artistic and expressive, meaning the aesthetics of this game are so bold that they're divisive. And I can't think of the last time an online multiplayer shooter was, criticized for being too artistically, bold. That's crazy. And then you do have the gameplay elements, which we'll dig into a little bit more because there are both positives and negatives to this as well, where it seems like, to paraphrase Bellular, no edges have been sanded off here. This is very much the intended experience is meant to be hardcore, brutal, punishing, and rewarding in equal measure due to that level of punishment, kind of a la a Souls-like or a FromSoft game in general. And on one level, the part of my brain that craves authenticity and artistic integrity within a published work is looking at Marathon and going, I want to buy this, whether or not it is going to be a game that I come back to forever and ever and ever. I want to reward that level of like artistic intention in a space that does not really have that much of it on the surface, right? Like, it's not to say there's an artistry that goes into those games. Obviously there is, but to have something this like garish and weird and unique out there, I feel like that's such a breath of fresh air conceptually that I want to reward a game for being singularly what it is, possibly at its own expense. But to give you a second now to talk, Zach, what it is specifically on a gameplay level is basically my personal kryptonite as a player of games. So I don't think I probably will be buying it, just because it's the antithesis of a game that would be made for me, if there were to be such a thing. So yeah, Zach, now to the gameplay bits. But yeah, I just need to vent that out for my own personal edification. All apologies.
No, I mean, if I remember back to our original episode, I think we were never critical of the art style either.
No.
I mean, I think the art style is interesting. I like the kind of neon colors, the bright colors. I think it's very different. And I think, honestly, what you just described, Aaron, is that it is not at all a AAA game in terms of, I would not say from a polish, although actually one of the things that people do take issue with is the first time user experience, also called FATUI as an acronym. Very funny acronym. But regardless of that, it's a very polished looking game. Apparently the systems are very deep. It's very clear a lot of money went into the game. But in terms of what AAA normally does, which is tries to be a little bit more approachable, tries to have the largest target audience possible, Generally, that means that some artistic intention and things that would be off-putting are sanded down, to Bellular's point in his video. That's not happening with this game. So it'll be very interesting to see how Sony reacts to Bungie really making a very targeted extraction shooter game focused on the more hardcore elements of the fandom and not on the general audience. And then to your point about gameplay, really the main criticism is that the first-time user experience is super clunky. The game doesn't really hold your hand with a PvE mode or a mode where it's easier to get your stuff back. It throws you right into the game, and you're immediately dealing with all the sweaty, hardcore players or the people that are equally as confused about what's going on as you are, navigating all of these really clunky UI menus, trying to understand what your mission is, what your objective is in this game. I do want to clarify, Aaron and I haven't played this, so this is all coming from, different outlets like the Alenia outlet, Bellular, News, Forbes, etc. But these are not outlets that are they're not outlets that typically get judged for being like bad gamers, air quotes, although I think that's a really stupid criticism of games journalism in a lot of ways. But regardless, these are not people that don't enjoy the game. A lot of these people have actually said they like the game a lot, but you have to suffer to kind of get to the part where it's enjoyable and you understand the systems and whatnot. And that's a lot to ask from new people. So people are going to bounce off of this game.
Yeah. It almost seems, based on the variety, and I've actually tried to intake a fair amount of variety of media coverage about Marathon, and if you can feel in your ears and sort of like the auditory experience of listening to this podcast that I have furrowed my brow and am clenching my temples, just in sort of consternation. Yes, that is happening, because I discovered an entire like rabbit hole of YouTube that seems to be bizarrely adopting the socio-political language of the far right in some cases, but definitely is just angry at Marathon for existing at the same time as Arc Raiders. And I'm not getting into all of that, but it was a very weird rabbit hole to find on YouTube, just like this whole contingent of people who have like built factions and just want Arc Raiders to defeat Marathon, as if there isn't technically room for both of them. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'm going to unclench now and re-zen back into the conversation. Among the more reputable individuals that we have sourced information from about Marathon, it does really seem like the game is almost belligerently difficult and belligerently resistant to onboarding players elegantly. Like, it almost feels like it's trying to alienate people so that the ones who survive the onboarding process are the target audience. Obviously, I'm projecting a fair amount of intention onto a developer that I do not know the individuals who would be making these decisions, so I can't claim that that's actually the case, but that does seem to be the general vibe. Which is, again, strategically so atypical for a game like this, that you would, generally speaking, want to launch to the widest possible audience and build the highest number of both daily active users and concurrent players, so that you can fill your lobbies and no one's going to be looking at your concurrent numbers and pointing fingers and chuckling and whatever. But yeah, the between the first time user experience just being apparently pretty abysmal, the user interface being difficult to parse is a pretty frequent criticism levied against the game, and then just the general sweatiness of the overall experience. It definitely is not meant to be a game for everyone. I think that the first time user experience stuff is obviously not entirely intentional. I think that a lot of that is the Alenia Substack bits definitely speculated that some of that was due to the fact that the server slam was so close to the actual launch date that there was no time to implement changes learned during the server slam. But, one way or the other, it does seem like the game is alienating a lot of people, but the ones who are surviving that onboarding process seem to actually love the experience. I think that's worth pointing out.
Yeah, and I think the other important thing just to mention here, I mean, you mentioned Arc Raiders earlier. It's one of the games that Sony's likely going to be comparing Marathon against just because they've come out sort of close enough to each other. And Arc Raiders has really illustrated the crazy success that an extraction shooter game can find if it's marketed properly. I mean, the 24-hour peak as of yesterday for that game is still 136,000 players, and it hit a maximum CCU or concurrent player count of 488,000. So like Arc Raiders, crazy successful game. The Alenia article does a great job of illustrating, though, that people played Arc Raiders. They immediately understood the game loop. The game focuses more on a PvE cooperative kind of focus. From the extraction perspective, you're actually sometimes working with other players that could potentially be hostile to take on bigger NPC threats. It's much less, oh no, is this person going to kill me for no reason? Am I going to get griefed, right? So generally speaking, Arc Raiders is a much more narratively focused, cooperative extraction experience that is catering to a more, it's catering to a wider audience. And also, I think that it has a niche art style, but it's a little bit less offensive to the majority of people than Marathon is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons why I think Arc Raiders was doing a little bit better. Its first time user experience ultimately, though, it looks like is one of the bigger differentiators because that Alenia Insights article, they had that side-by-side for the server slams between the two games, and Arc Raiders saw a massive jump of 80% in their copies or pre-orders sold after the server slam compared to Marathon's 49% increase in sales. So I think you can largely probably attribute that 30% difference as being people easily onboarding to the experience and not bouncing off of it, because the game just does a much better job of tutorializing things for you and illustrating what the purpose of the game is and what you should be doing. And ultimately, that's something Marathon seemingly struggles with. So I think it's just worth bringing that out. And since we're talking about CCU metrics, we're throwing all this stuff around, I think it's also important to compare it to two other games real quick. First, I'm just going to mention Slay the Spire 2 because I think it's the quicker one to get through. Slay the Spire 2 released around the same time as Marathon. Obviously, that's a pretty indie game. And it had over 100,000 concurrent players at one point in time. Massively well-received indie game. It beat Marathon in terms of concurrent players. It may even have more daily active users than Marathon. I don't have access to that data. Just wanted to bring it up, though, because I'm assuming from, everything in media storytelling, right, Aaron? I feel it probably doesn't look great that this indie game beat Marathon. Bungie, this legacy studio known for Halo. I'm assuming Sony's not super thrilled about that. And then the other thing, Helldivers 2, which is a Sony studio, they very clearly were hoping that this game was going to surpass the success of Helldivers 2, which maxed out at a CCU of 458,000 people. It didn't even do that. And actually, currently, the 24-hour peak for Helldivers 2 is 64,000 players, which is more than the current 24-hour peak for Marathon, which is 41,000.
Years later.
Yeah. So, doing the comparison game, Sony's probably not very thrilled with this investment.
I think that just looking at the numbers, there's almost no way that Sony executives are jumping up and down and clapping their hands with glee at the numbers that Marathon put up. But this is the part where I start to get deeply curious, right? Because based on everything I've read and based on everything I've seen, I do not know that there is a team of executives in the gaming space that are so... I mean, and I'm going to say this and it's going to immediately sound like the most ridiculous thing I've ever said, because never underestimate an executive's capacity to be out of touch. But I can't imagine that the executives at Sony are so incredibly out of touch that they listened to the pitches for Marathon, watched the progress on Marathon, play tested Marathon, ideally attempted to understand what Marathon was and what Bungie was going for, and then looked at the final shippable product and said, surely this product is positioned to compete at the same level as Helldivers 2 or Arc Raiders. Slay the Spire is, of course, a bit of an outlier because it is the reasonably well anticipated sequel to a beloved indie game that was, a breakout hit during its original run. So it definitely probably doesn't look good for an indie game to outpace Bungie's newest shooter. But when you look at how absolutely bonkers niche this product is meant to be, it really does feel like, how could they have expected it to do much better? And there's almost an argument to be made that if this game had launched to the widest possible audience, its reviews would almost certainly be worse, right? Because more people would be demanding refunds than actually sticking with the game, because the game is bouncing people left and right because it's so alienating and specific. I know we're kind of getting towards like second half of the episode territory with this line of thought, but the idea that this game, it would be like looking at, okay, my favorite screenwriter, Charlie Kaufman, has just done a new short film, and a couple of smaller projects that are basically being released to libraries as like things for people to rent at a library. And I find that to be a fascinating distribution method for an Academy Award winning screenwriter, and one of the more interesting artistic voices, just active in the world. And no one would expect a weird niche specific Charlie Kaufman short film to do Avatar 3 numbers, right? Just because that's not what the product is designed to do. So it trips me out that we are by necessity still comparing Marathon to these larger blockbuster popcorn, comparison games, when it is not really that in practice based on all available evidence.
Yeah, it is interesting seeing them going from a game like Destiny 2, or even I would argue Halo, if we want to go all the way back, which are not very hardcore in my opinion. Well, certainly not Destiny. I think Destiny is supposed to be about as approachable as you can get for a game. And then move to Marathon. I wonder if Sony thought that the Bungie brand and the brand of Destiny and Halo and whatnot would bring over enough people to make up for the difference. But the reality is like, you're just hoping for people to not refund at that point, because if the game's targeting a hardcore audience, you're not going to convert most people into hardcore players. You might convert some people, but you're not going to convert most people. I will say, to their credit, based on what Alinea Insights is reporting, we're actually seeing a pretty solid conversion rate of people that played Halo and Destiny or just enjoy the Bungie brand giving this game a chance. There's a pretty strong correlation based on the data that they showed. But, you're only going to do so much. You're not going to make me a hardcore extraction shooter player, more than likely, just because I have a, nostalgia for your brand. That's a big ask, especially for anyone that's like an actual adult. So yeah, it's strange that it was allowed to turn into such kind of a niche target audience for the game.
Yeah.
Especially because I feel like, I like to think Sony knows how to effectively deduce what a target audience for a game is. They have a lot of success with their single player titles, at least, but like, I don't know, maybe they truly are so inept when it comes to games as a service, these multiplayer games. They just don't know. And they truly put all of that decision making on the Bungie team, and the Bungie team just decided this is what they wanted to make, which in some ways is very commendable. Because again, this is not even a bad game. It's just a strange game to spend over, $3.7 billion on. And obviously that's not entirely fair because they bought the entire studio, which comes with Destiny and da-da-da-da. But it's just very clear, like, this is probably not what Sony was envisioning for their first live service game with Bungie.